Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, grant us concentration, that we may learn, listen, understand, have a peaceful mind, and remember that you're with us always. Amen. For this video, we're going to continue to talk about water potential for a little bit more. I want to do a quick review of water potential and its relationship to movement up through the plant. And then we're going to look at another application of water potential that is related to movement in the xylem, or in the phloem. So to start with, so if you remember water potential, we said water potential equals the sum of physical pressure, physical potential, pressure potential, and the solute potential. Where water has a higher potential, or if it has a lower potential, it means that water is more likely to move towards that. So water will move to a more negative water potential. Okay, and so those are the things we have to keep in mind. So when we talk about movement of water into and up a plant, it is really this relationship that is occurring. So if we start in the soil, and we have on this graph, we're showing again water potential as we move up the plant and eventually reaching the air. Okay, and so when we start this discussion, we can see that the soil water potential is about 0. Inside the roots, where we come up here, so inside the roots, we're slightly negative. So water is more likely to move into the roots than out of the roots. As we move up the plant, because we're increasing concentration, so you remember the increase or high concentration is going to be equal to a more negative solute potential. So as we move up, the increased concentration in the plant means that the water potential will be more negative. So water will continue to move up the plant. Also keep in mind, as we talked about with transpiration, the cohesion, which is holding the water molecules together, will act to sort of pull them up as they're moving up. So the water is going to continue to move up. This is xylem movement. Once it reaches the air, so where's the air at? This is the limitation here where we're talking about the guard cells around the stoma or stomata. And if the guard cells are open, that means there's a continuous connection to the water that's coming up through the plant. And so as it reaches there, notice how negative, very high negative, it has it at minus 100, the water potential of the air is. So that water potential is very, very high negative, which means the water is going to move out of the plant. And as the water moves out of the plant here through the stoma, this water is pulled up, this water is pulled up, and we're even going to pull some of the water up from the roots. So it's this continual movement that's going to be the relationship between water potential and the transpiration or movement of the plant. So when we talk about the movement in the plant, there are a couple of terms that I think we need to sort of discuss. And so we've already talked about most of these, and that is the fact that what we've just discussed is the movement of water up the plant in the xylem, okay? And this is going to be determined by the water potential gradient. As it gets more negative, water will move towards that. In the case of the phloem, however, we've already mentioned that the phloem is able to move in both directions. This too, in a different way, which I'm about to explain, shows the relationship to water potential. Okay? And so when we talk about the movement in the phloem, okay, we're referred to this as translocation. Okay. And so way translocation, and we're going to use the pressure flow theory to explain this, and this involves the water potential. So here in simplified form, in a lot of ways, is how this transport works. So the transport starts with the active movement of sugars, carbohydrates into the phloem. Okay. As that sugar is pumped in, there may be some ions that are moved in there too. Notice what's happening. What's going to happen then is that's going to increase concentration of solutes in the phloem. So that increased concentration in the phloem means that it has a lower water potential. Now running right beside the phloem is the xylem, and the xylem has this water in it. And so as the water potential is lowering in the phloem, the water will begin to move passively into the phloem. And so again, following the water potential. Lower water potential in the phloem means that you're going to actually increase the movement towards the phloem. Now think of this as a sort of semi-solid, if not completely solid, tube. As the water begins to move in there, that's going to increase the pressure. Let's try this up here. It increases the pressure potential inside the phloem. And so if the pressure potential is positive or less negative, that means the water is going to move away from that. Because there isn't a direction, it can move in both directions. And so as we increase this pressure potential, because water is passively moving in as a result of the increased concentration, reduced solute potential, that increases the physical pressure in there, which will cause the liquid, the sap, to move away from that particular location. And it moves in both directions. Okay. So this gives you an example of how we can use water potential to understand a little better phloem movement or phloem loading. And the loading of the phloem is the active transport of the solutes, of the sugars in the phloem. Okay? So that gives you another way that we can look at the water potential and its relationship to movement in the phloem. Okay? So there are two terms that are important when we consider the movement, and that is the source and the sink. And so the source of the particular metabolite we were looking at is going to be where it's being produced or being moved into the phloem. And so, for example, if we look at sucrose or sugar, sugars will be during we're talking about normal summertime when the sun's out, the leaves are out. Sugars will be produced in the leaves, right? Because of photosynthesis. So in this case, we could say that the source of the carbohydrates will be the leaves. And so that's what we're showing right here, is that that's the source. The carbohydrates, the sucrose, is being produced there and is being actively transported into the phloem to be able to direct the movement. The opposite end of that is where these sugars are destined to move to. So the sucrose then can be pumped down into the roots, and it's also going to move up into the apex where the plant is growing. And so these become the sink for that. And so in this case, rather than moving out, we have active transport of the sugar out of the phloem into the tissues that are using it, and then the water will be returned into the xylem, which will continue moving. And so this is an example of the source and sink concept. Think about what happens right now during this time of the year with the trees that we have, the deciduous trees. Okay? Now we're flipping this around. So the sugar that was stored in the roots all winter long when the plant wasn't growing, that's becoming the source of the sugar. And that sugar is actively moved into the phloem, which is then going to be moved up the tree to the leaves, where the sink for that will be where it's going to be actively used to stimulate the growth of the buds. And so then the leaves will start growing. So you can see, hopefully, in this that the source and the sink are going to shift from time to time based on the needs of the plants. Okay? And so this is sort of our last look at the transport system and how we're moving it. In the next video, I want to begin to look closer at the shoot, to begin to look at some of the specializations that we see, some of the different structures that are present there that will allow for the plants to excel. We're going to turn that around then and also look at the roots and some of the modifications there. So we'll continue with our plant structures, looking more specifically at the external structures. Thank you again for watching this video. Please let me know if you have any questions. Post those on the discussion boards on Schoology or contact me with the questions. Thank you.